Something is happening in America that most people don't want to admit. You can feel it in the grocery aisles, at the gas pumps, in your rent payments, and in the silent frustration that fills family dinner tables. It's not an apocalypse. It's not a sudden collapse. It's quieter than that. It's slower. It's the kind of collapse that doesn't make headlines until it's too late. Let me ask you this. If an empire were falling, would you even know it while you're living in it? Because the truth is, America's collapse isn't going to look like the fall of Rome or the 2008 crash. It's going to look like what's already happening right now. Empty shelves, shrinking portions, rising prices, vanishing savings, working harder, and feeling poorer. This isn't fear-mongering. It's economics, and to understand it, we need to pull back the curtain on three things: the food crisis, the cost of living, and the lies being told to keep it all hidden. Let's start with food. In 2019, a carton of eggs in the U.S. cost about $1.50. In 2023, it hit nearly $5. Ground beef? Up 30%. Milk? Up 20%. Even basic staples like bread and rice, up double digits across the board. Now, sure, the government says inflation is cooling down. They say the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is under control. But that's the first lie, because the CPI doesn't measure your real cost of living. It measures a basket of goods that economists adjust and manipulate over time. If steak becomes too expensive, they replace it with chicken. If chicken becomes too expensive, they replace it with beans. And then they tell you inflation is only 3%. But what they're not telling you is that your quality of life is being quietly downgraded. That's how collapse hides itself, behind data that's been massaged to look stable. Meanwhile, food insecurity in America is climbing. According to USDA data, over 44 million people, including 1 in 5 children, lived in food-insecure households in 2023. That's the highest it's been in over a decade. Think about that. The richest nation on earth, home to billion-dollar grocery chains and trillion-dollar corporations, now has tens of millions of citizens struggling to afford meals. So, what happened? Well, several forces collided. First, the pandemic exposed how fragile the food supply chain really is. We saw how dependent America had become on just-in-time logistics, where products move instantly from farm to warehouse to store, with almost no buffer. Then came droughts, rising energy costs, fertilizer shortages due to the Russia-Ukraine war, and corporate consolidation, where just a handful of companies now control most of the food industry. Tyson, JBS, Cargill, and a few others dominate meat processing. When one plant shuts down, millions feel it. And that brings us to the cruel irony of modern capitalism. Efficiency makes profits, but it kills resilience. Farmers are being squeezed too. Input costs like fuel, seeds, and fertilizers have skyrocketed. Small farms can't keep up, so they sell, often to big agribusiness firms that prioritize margins over local sustainability. It's why we're seeing record profits at grocery conglomerates while local producers go bankrupt. So, when the government tells you inflation is under control, you have to ask, for whom? Because for the average American family, food is eating up more of their paycheck than at any time in the last 30 years. But the food crisis is just one symptom. The real story is the cost of living and how it's fundamentally reshaping what it means to live in America. Let's zoom out. Wages in the U.S. have technically risen, but when adjusted for inflation, real wages are stagnant or even falling. Rent? Up 25% since 2020. Car payments? At record highs. Health insurance? Through the roof. And student debt, which was briefly paused, is back with a vengeance. The result is simple. The average American has less and less disposable income. But here's where it gets darker. For decades, America's middle class was built on one promise, that if you worked hard, you could afford a home, raise a family, and retire comfortably. That dream is now mathematically impossible for millions. Home prices have outpaced income growth by over 7 times since the 1970s. The average home in 1970 cost roughly $24,000, about 2.6 times the average household income. Today, the median home costs over $400,000, more than 6 times the median income. That's not an economy growing. That's an economy drifting away from its people. And while the media focuses on luxury markets, record stock prices, and new billionaire launches, they're ignoring what's happening beneath the surface, a quiet hollowing out of economic stability. The wealthy own assets. Assets grow with inflation. The poor and middle class own cash. Cash loses value with inflation. So the system itself, by design, widens inequality. And that's the part most Americans don't see, because they're trapped in the illusion that everything is returning to normal. But nothing about this is normal. The average rent in major U.S. cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Miami now surpasses $3,000 a month. Credit card debt has crossed $1.3 trillion, the highest in history. And interest rates, which the Federal Reserve raised to combat inflation, have made mortgages, loans, and car payments painfully expensive. So, Americans are drowning, not in one big wave, but in a slow, relentless tide. And while this is happening, the government keeps insisting the economy is resilient. Politicians from both sides parade unemployment numbers as proof of health, ignoring that millions are working multiple jobs just to survive. Let's be honest, employment isn't the same as prosperity. You can be fully employed and still starving. That's the second lie, the idea that GDP growth and job numbers tell the full story. Because under the surface, there's a different kind of economy growing, an economy of desperation. People renting out rooms in their homes just to afford the mortgage, teachers driving Uber after class, retirees returning to work because their savings no longer cover basic expenses. And all of this is happening while corporate profits hit record highs. So, the question becomes, who is this economy really working for? The system isn't collapsing overnight. It's eroding, piece by piece, through policies and narratives designed to keep people calm while wealth quietly flows upward. Now, you might be wondering, if things are this bad, why don't we hear more about it? Why isn't this the top headline every day? Because that's the third and most dangerous part of this story. The lies keeping it hidden. The illusion of stability is one of the most powerful tools of control, and in America, it's carefully crafted through numbers, narratives, and national pride. Let's pick up where we left off, the illusion. Because the biggest secret about America's so-called strong economy isn't that it's collapsing, it's that the collapse is being rebranded as progress. Every month, government agencies publish numbers, inflation rates, job data, GDP growth. The media repeats them like gospel. But behind those glossy headlines lies a silent crisis that can't be measured by spreadsheets. Take inflation. When the government says inflation is only 3.4%, what they don't mention is that housing, food, and energy, the things people actually need, are up far more than that. The CPI, the official inflation measure, uses a concept called hedonic adjustment. It means if your new laptop costs the same but has a better screen, they count it as cheaper in real terms. Or if you buy a smaller bag of chips for the same price, they say inflation hasn't increased, even though you're getting less. That's how the math hides the suffering. It's like telling someone who's drowning that the water level only rose by an inch. Technically true, completely meaningless. And here's where the deception deepens: GDP growth. The government loves to boast about it, but GDP doesn't measure well-being. It doesn't care if growth comes from war spending, environmental destruction, or billionaires buying their third yacht. It just measures activity, even if that activity is society paying more just to survive. You see, when prices go up, GDP goes up. When people take out more loans to afford basic needs, GDP goes up. When healthcare costs explode, GDP goes up. So America's economy looks healthy on paper, not because people are thriving, but because they're spending more to stay alive. And then there's the unemployment rate, another illusion. The official number counts people who are actively seeking work. But if you've given up looking, If you're working part-time but want full-time, if you're juggling gig jobs that don't provide stability, you don't count as unemployed. The government says unemployment is under 4%, but the real unemployment rate, including underemployed and discouraged workers, is nearly double that. So when they tell you the economy is strong, Americans are working, remember, it's not strength, it's survival. But the problem isn't just the data, it's the narrative. Corporate media, owned by the same conglomerates that benefit from this system, play a crucial role in maintaining the illusion. When rent skyrockets, they call it a housing boom. When wages stagnate, they call it a tight labor market. When people go into debt, they call it consumer confidence. Language is powerful. It shapes perception, and perception shapes compliance. If you can convince people that their suffering is normal, you can stop them from asking questions. And that's exactly what's happening. America's corporate media doesn't serve truth. It serves stability for those at the top. Every time there's a crisis, inflation, layoffs, food shortages, the headlines quickly pivot to optimism. The economy is resilient, they say. Experts see improvement. But let's ask a simple question. Resilient for whom? Because while the working class struggles to buy groceries, corporate executives are buying back their own shares, driving stock prices higher, and rewarding themselves with record bonuses. In 2023, the CEOs of the largest U.S. companies earned an average of 344 times more than their median employee. Meanwhile, over 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. That's not resilience. That's extraction. The truth is, America isn't experiencing a traditional economic collapse. It's experiencing a controlled demolition of the middle class. Debt is the dynamite, inflation is the spark, and manipulation is the smoke that hides it all. Now let's talk about something most people overlook: how this collapse feels at the ground level. It's not riots or chaos, it's exhaustion. It's the quiet panic when you swipe your card and hope it goes through. It's the slow disappearance of free time, replaced by side hustles and credit card payments. It's families buying less meat, skipping vacations, and delaying medical care. This is what a modern economic collapse looks like. It's polite, quiet, and invisible until it's too late. And here's where the psychological side comes in. When a society experiences slow decline, people adapt. They normalize the pain. Economists call this adaptive expectation, when people adjust to worse conditions and stop resisting them. You stop asking why groceries cost $200. You stop asking why housing is unaffordable. You just accept it. That's the most dangerous part of all, when the population becomes numb. The same numbness existed in the late Roman Empire, when inflation devalued silver coins, food shortages spread, and elites kept saying, "Rome is strong." Sound familiar? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And now, even America's institutions, once seen as unshakable, are eroding under the same pressure. Healthcare, broken; education, drowning in debt; infrastructure, crumbling; public trust, collapsing. Every year, the U.S. spends billions abroad, funding wars, sending aid, policing the world, while millions of its own citizens sleep in cars and skip meals. This is how great powers decay, not from a single disaster, but from the slow misallocation of priorities. So when we ask, is America collapsing? The answer depends on what lens you're using. If you're looking at Wall Street, everything's fine. Stocks are up. Profits are booming. If you're looking at Main Street, the reality of everyday people, it's already happening. That's the quiet collapse. The one that doesn't need a financial crash or a revolution. The one that happens when people simply stop believing things will ever get better. But this collapse isn't inevitable. It's engineered through policy choices that favor speculation over production, debt over savings, illusion over honesty. And that brings us to the final piece of this puzzle. What's coming next? Because the system can't keep running on illusions forever. The cracks are already visible: record national debt, declining productivity, and a generation losing faith in the idea of the American dream. The system isn't collapsing overnight. It's eroding, piece by piece, through policies and narratives designed to keep people calm while wealth quietly flows upward. Now, you might be wondering, if things are this bad, why don't we hear more about it? Why isn't this the top headline every day? Because that's the third and most dangerous part of this story, the lies keeping it hidden. The illusion of stability is one of the most powerful tools of control, and in America, it's carefully crafted through numbers, narratives, and national pride. Let's finish this story, because the collapse we've been talking about isn't the end of America, it's the end of an illusion. When you peel back the data, the headlines, and the political speeches, what you find is something brutally simple. The economy no longer serves the people who built it. But here's the twist. This collapse didn't happen by accident. It's not the result of bad luck or random global events. It's the consequence of deliberate economic design, decades of policies that prioritized markets over families, shareholders over workers, and profits over stability. Let's look at how that design unfolded. In the 1970s, America began shifting from an industrial economy, one that made things, to a financial economy, one that moves money instead of creating real value. Factories closed, jobs went overseas, wages stagnated, but corporate profits, they soared, and the government, instead of reversing the trend, doubled down on it. They deregulated Wall Street, slashed taxes for the wealthy, and allowed the Federal Reserve to print money whenever markets trembled. The result? A financialized system where speculation replaced innovation. Today, nearly 40% of all corporate profits come from the financial sector, not from producing goods or employing people, but from trading, debt, and manipulation. And that's where the quiet collapse begins, when an economy forgets how to sustain itself. Because what happens when every dollar created is borrowed? What happens when growth depends not on productivity, but on people going deeper into debt just to live? You get what America has now. A society running on fumes. The average American household has less than $1,000 in savings. The federal government owes more than $35 trillion, and corporate America owes nearly $13 trillion. This is not wealth, it's leverage, and leverage always breaks. But the architects of this system aren't worried, because for them, collapse is an opportunity. When prices fall and markets crash, they buy cheap. When inflation rises, their assets grow. When ordinary people lose homes, corporations buy them in bulk and rent them back to the same people who once owned them. You've seen it already. Private equity firms like BlackRock and Vanguard quietly buying up entire neighborhoods, turning the dream of homeownership into a permanent rental economy. It's feudalism, modernized. You don't own the land, you don't own your house, you don't own your car, you rent everything, even your digital life, and all the while, you're told this is progress. But here's the deeper danger. When economic power concentrates, so does political power. When billionaires and corporations control both production and perception, democracy becomes decoration. Elections happen, sure, but the policies rarely change. The same interests win, regardless of who you vote for. That's why both major parties talk endlessly about the middle class, but pass laws that benefit the top 1%. It's not incompetence, it's design. And as long as people are divided, left versus right, red versus blue, they'll never notice the real conflict, top versus bottom. Because while America argues about culture wars, its wealth is being siphoned off through economic warfare. But the good news? Awareness is growing. More Americans than ever are questioning the official story. They're realizing that working 60 hours a week and still struggling isn't a personal failure. It's a systemic trap. They're asking where their tax dollars really go. Why healthcare costs more than rent? Why education demands lifelong debt? Why record GDP doesn't feel like prosperity? And once people start asking those questions, the illusion starts to break. So what comes next? Economically, the U.S. faces three possible paths in the next decade. Path 1, denial. The government continues printing money, expanding debt, and pretending everything is fine. That leads to stagflation, low growth, high prices, and the slow decay of living standards. Path 2. Reset. The system cracks, markets crash, and a new financial order emerges, possibly involving digital currencies and centralized control. This is already being tested. Look at the push for central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. They promise convenience, but they also give governments unprecedented power to monitor and control transactions. Path 3. Reconstruction. The hardest but the most hopeful. America could rebuild around real production, local economies, and self-sufficiency, a move away from speculation and toward sustainability. That means supporting small businesses, investing in manufacturing, rebuilding infrastructure, and reforming the monetary system to favor value creation over debt expansion. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Because collapse isn't just destruction, it's also a reset button. Every empire in history has faced this moment, where arrogance meets reality and illusion meets mathematics. The question is, will America adapt, or will it keep pretending the problem doesn't exist? You can already see the early signs of awakening. People growing their own food, buying second-hand instead of brand new, moving away from cities, rejecting consumer debt, investing in tangible assets. Not hype. It's small, but it's a start. Because the real revolution isn't political, it's personal. It's when millions of people quietly decide to stop playing a rigged game, to stop believing that inflation is normal, that renting forever is smart, that working harder for less is progress. The collapse only continues as long as people believe in the illusion. Once they stop, everything changes, and maybe that's what the elites fear most. Not rebellion, not revolution, but realization. That moment when ordinary Americans look around and realize this system isn't broken by accident. It's working exactly as designed, just not for them. So what can you do? Start by understanding the system. Don't take headlines at face value. Read beyond the numbers. Learn how money, debt, and inflation actually work. Build your own economic resilience through savings, real assets, and knowledge. Because knowledge is the one currency they can't devalue. And when enough people understand that, the quiet collapse will no longer be quiet. It will become a reckoning. And that's when change, real change, begins. If you found this video thought-provoking, give it a like so more people can see it. Comment your thoughts below. Do you think America can recover, or is the collapse already too deep? And make sure to subscribe to The Financial Economist for more deep dive documentaries like this, where we break down the stories behind the numbers and reveal the truth the mainstream won't tell you. Because the economy isn't just about money, it's about power, truth, and survival. And in the end, understanding it might be the only way to survive what's coming next. The system isn't collapsing overnight, it's eroding, piece by piece, through policies and narratives designed to keep people calm while wealth quietly flows upward. Now, you might be wondering, if things are this bad, why don't we hear more about it? Why isn't this the top headline every day? Because that's the third and most dangerous part of this story. The lies keeping it hidden. The illusion of stability is one of the most powerful tools of control, and in America, it's carefully crafted through numbers, narratives, and national pride.